recognize our colleague, the distinguished senator from Virginia, Tim Kaine, who will introduce Ms. Elwood. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. This is an honor. One of my favorite things to do in the Senate is bring talented Virginians before the body who are committed to public service, and Ms. Elwood is such an individual. I'm just going to warn you, doing this in front of my senior senator, and also the only Alexandria native in the Senate, Senator King from Maine, makes me feel a little bit nervous. And some of you need to know that the non-Virginians here need to know that Ms. Elwood lives down the street from Senator Warner. And on that score, Mark, will you take your Christmas lights down? That was a joke. Actually, she has trick-or-treated at Senator Warner's house, and the first test of her discretion as an Intel professional will be not revealing his costumes that she's seen over the years. As I said, it's always rewarding. I know all of this feel this way about our states, that we have deep talent pools of wonderful people who are public servants, and public servants often don't get the thanks that they deserve. They don't get the appreciation they deserve, but bringing somebody before this committee or others who is willing to serve in a really important position does give me a real sense of pride. I think that people who arrive here are the creatures of their experience, and so frequently that experience begins with an upbringing and lessons learned as kids through parents, teachers, grandparents, counselors, or other mentors. And with Ms. Elwood, that's no exception. She had a foundation in family that really laid the groundwork for her public service career. Her father, the late General Edwin Simmons, served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam as a United States Marine, and his legacy continues in the Marine Corps. Today, one of the buildings at Marine Corps University in Quantico is named after her dad. And her mother was a dedicated public servant as well, working and traveling the world in the Foreign Service before settling in Northern Virginia. Courtney's been a path breaker in her career. She was in the first class of a high school in Fairfax, West Potomac High School that was formed through the merger of two very competitive high schools. And this first class had to create new traditions and bring together folks who had been, at least on the athletic fields, rivals before. And then she went to Washington and Lee for undergrad, where she was in the second class of women, and people used to say she must be a feminist because she raised her hand. So she's been willing to be a path breaker and has had encouragement from family and professors to do that. When Courtney finished it at WNL, as was mentioned, she went to Yale Law School, and she worked with our Senate colleagues, the younger Senators Bennett and Coons, who were at Yale Law School the same time as she was. She's now worked in the legal profession for 20 years, and the chairman went through some of her experience, including public service experience, serving as a clerk on the Fourth Circuit, serving in the very prestigious position as a clerk on the Supreme Court for Chief Justice Rehnquist, as counsel in the White House, the Office of Vice President, the Department of Justice. And I also know many of Courtney's law partners in private practice well, and it's a private firm that is filled with people who are very public-spirited, Democrats and Republicans. They appreciate those who are public-spirited, and I know Courtney has absorbed that lesson from them as well. Courtney will, I know, talk about her family. Her husband John is here. The two boys, ages 15 and 12, live in Alexandria. They're in school today. But I'll just conclude and say that so much of what we do depends upon the talent of the people that we bring into these very, very difficult positions. And with Courtney Elwood, you have somebody of a sterling professional background, but more importantly, I think for purposes of this position, with a sterling reputation for integrity that is necessary in the CAI General Counsel position. It's my honor to present her to the committee. And as I said to the chairman, I have a bill being marked up in the Help Committee. Usually my bills actually go better when I'm not there, but I probably should at least go up to make sure that that's okay. So I hope you'll excuse me so I can head upstairs.
Tim, thank you. You are excused, and if you would shepherd my bill through that.
His is being marked up as well. Thank you so much.
I was hoping we'd have a chance to question Senator Kaine.
I would second that.
I think I'd prefer to do that in closed session. Ms. Elwood, would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to give this committee the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Please be seated. Courtney, before we move to your statement, I'd like to ask you to answer 5 questions that the committee poses to each nominee who appears before us. They require just a simple yes or no answer for the record. Do you agree to appear before the committee here or in any other venue when you're invited?
Yes, sir.
If confirmed, do you agree to send officials from your office to appear before the committee and designated staff when invited?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree to provide documents or any other materials requested by the committee in order for us to carry out our oversight function and legislative responsibilities?
Yes, consistent with the law.
Will you both ensure that your office and your staff provide such materials to the committee when requested?
Yes, consistent with the law.
Do you agree to inform and fully brief to the fullest extent possible all members of this Committee of Intelligence Activities and Covert Action rather than only the chair and the vice chair?
Again, consistent with the law. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to your opening statement, after which I'll recognize members by seniority for up to 5 minutes of questions. Ms. Elwood, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, it is an honor to appear before you as the nominee to be General Counsel of the Central Intelligence Agency. I want to thank President Trump and Director Pompeo for their trust and confidence in me. I also want to thank Senator Kaine for that nice introduction. It was a great privilege and pleasure to meet not just one, but both of my home state senators as part of this process. I'd like to use this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about me and what I view as essential qualifications for a CIA General Counsel. I come from a national security family. As Senator Kaine alluded, my father devoted his life to the Marine Corps and to this country. He spent 36 years in uniform, seeing active combat in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. There is little doubt that good intelligence kept him and his men alive during those years. He would later write about the remarkably good intelligence brought by bold foreign agents during his fight at the Chosin Reservoir. When Dad returned home from Vietnam in 1971, he formed the Marine Corps' History Division, which he led for 24 years. He was a prolific author of military histories, and he supported the work of many other military historians. He did so because he believed that there were lessons to be learned from the great achievements and the mistakes of U.S. warfare, mistakes that future generations must not forget. My mother, in her own way, was no less brave and tough than her Marine husband. She overcame poverty and more than her share of life's adversities to have a career in the Foreign Service before she married and raised our family. The lessons around our kitchen table were about personal responsibility, honor, and valor. We were taught to adhere to our principles, even if it comes at great personal or professional sacrifice. If my parents were alive today, they would take great pride in my being considered for this position. It is thanks to them that I believe I have some of the chief to be his best friend on the court. The chief built warm personal relationships with all of his colleagues.
Accommodating by letting your kids possibly watch this on TV. Ms. Elwood, there's been much discussion about the role of the Central Intelligence Agency and how it played into the detention and interrogation of terrorism subjects as part of the RDI program. Those detention facilities operated by the CIA have long since been closed, and President Obama officially ended the program 7 years ago. I think the debate space on this subject has become confused, and I'm certain that the law is now very clear. Here's my question. Do you agree that it would require a change in law for the CIA or any government agency to lawfully employ any interrogation techniques beyond those defined in the Army Field Manual?
Yes, sir.
The intelligence community is at its strongest when operating with the full confidence that its activities are legal, moral, and ethical, and thereby in line with the public's trust. I think it's also safe to say that increasing judicial and congressional oversight only increases that public trust. Do you believe that President Bush's terrorist surveillance program was strengthened when we brought it under FISA court and congressional oversight in 2007?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I believed at the time, and I believe today, that the legal foundation for what became known as the President's terrorist surveillance program was strengthened by bringing it under the then existing FISA provisions and the review of the FISA court.
Great. Before I turn to the Vice Chairman, I'd like to make one final comment in lieu of a question. You noted in your opening statement that a second prerequisite to the job is independence. I and many of my colleagues would agree wholeheartedly with that statement. Being an independent voice is not always easy, and you'll be asked repeatedly to speak truth to power when serving as the CIA's General Counsel. I think you've displayed in your career the ability to be independent, and I'm confident that you will continue to do so at the CIA. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Elwood, again, thank you for your very eloquent opening statement and our opportunity to visit. I'm going to revisit some of the things we talked about. Following up on the Chairman's comments about rendition and the fact that the law is very clear in terms of the fact that the Army Field Manual applies to CIA interrogations. One of the things that during the confirmation process of Director Pompeo, he committed to reviewing parts of the classified committee study on rendition and interrogation that are relevant. Will you likewise commit to reading and reviewing those parts of that classified study that are relevant to the Office of the General Counsel?
Yes, sir.
Shared with other members, I think it is appropriate to have a fresh look at this issue.
Yeah, I certainly will follow the lead of Director Pompeo and Director Coates on this, and I'll note that Director Coates had commented that it's often a conversation with the leadership on when they extend the briefing to the full committee, that he worked, or in the past the director has worked with the chair and the vice chair on timing of extending
The more we can get all the members read in on more activities, I think the better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Elwood, it's good to have you here. I was appreciative of your testimony and your desire to follow in the public service commitments that both your mother and your father had, and very much in line with when I asked you when we had a chance to visit, why would you take this job? This is a hard job at a hard time, and it's good to have you step forward to do it. I've got several questions about, frankly, the terror surveillance program, and not very long to ask them. So if others want to further exhaust your answers, I'd ask you to keep these relatively brief. But I noticed a number of the questions you were asked to respond to, it was about that program. Give me a sense, what were the jobs you had on 9/11 and after, and then the rest of your service in the Bush administration?
So leading up to 9/11, nobody obviously was anticipating, at least not in my level. My role in the Associate's Counsel's office had nothing to do with national security, frankly, but we all became sort of focused on national security. We were in the White House on September 11th, and immediately thereafter, I and a couple of members of my office were sent to the Senate and to the House to negotiate the Patriot Act.
And were you working then for the Justice Department or the Vice President?
No, and it's on September 11th, I was working for I was Associate Counsel to the President. So I was in the Office of the President. And I stayed in that position until May 2002, when we had our first child. I returned to government service in January or February of 2003. I think it was January of 2003 to the Office of the Vice President, where I stayed until the beginning of 2005.
And then you were where?
Then I went with Judge Gonzalez to the Attorney General's front office.
And your job there was what?
I was Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Attorney General, and as any staffer in your offices would tell you, it changes by the day, but by and large, my portfolio fell under the Associate Attorney General's portfolio, so it would be those components that fall in the Department of Justice under the Associate Attorney General, the Civil Division. In addition, I would monitor the Office of Legal Counsel, the Office of the Solicitor General, the Office of Legal Policy, among others.
What would you have known in that job, or what did you know about the terror surveillance program?
Senator, I learned, or my work on the terror surveillance program began in December of 2005, when the President publicly disclosed that aspect of the President's surveillance program.
Best of your knowledge, were you aware of it before that?
No, sir.
And did you have a reason to have a reaction at the time to the critics of the program, critics like David Criss, who was a former Assistant Attorney General for National Security?
Well, interestingly enough, David and I are old friends and have known each other forever. And once he heard about it, he kind of asked me, so what are the legal authorities that support this? And we had a conversation. I was aware of the public statements about the legal authorities supporting the program, and we had a conversation and some communications about it, and ultimately he did not agree with all of the reasoning, but he recognized that, as I did, that these are complex issues on which reasonable people could disagree.
Be fair to characterize him as a public critic of the program, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
And is he? I noticed he's one of the people recommending you for this job.
Yes, sir. He very kindly sent a letter of support and actually organized a letter of support on my behalf.
Are there other people who were critics of that program who are included on that list?
I am quite confident that there are people who have signed the letter of support who did not think many of the things that occurred in the Bush administration that would be things that they would agree with. But I don't know of any others who have publicly stated.
And how do you think that experience of the terror surveillance program and what happened when there was a disagreement, how do you think that would impact the way you would serve in this job?
That's a very interesting question. I think that my experience with respect to that important program and how it was handled initially and then through the re-examination of the legality of the program in 2004, we hope we learn from how things were handled initially and the intense secrecy around the program, even within the executive branch. I believe would be more prepared, or would be able to better advise the director on how to ensure that programs that will necessarily be secret, if they should be disclosed, are thoroughly thought through, and recognizing that, in some instances, you'll have to publicly justify how decisions are made on the front end and on the back end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to begin by saying I was really very pleased to meet you, have an opportunity to speak with you, and I very much respect your experience and your intellect. I'm going to put the question that the chairman asked you in a slightly, harsher view, but I think it's a real view. During his campaign, President-elect Trump publicly called for U.S. forces to use torture in the war on terror. He said he'd reinstitute waterboarding, which he called a minor form of torture, and bring back, quote, a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding. Now, this brought a lot of condemnation from our allies and our own intelligence and security professionals who did not believe that these particular EITs were effective in producing operational intelligence. Director Pompeo said at one point early on that he would support the return of waterboarding. Gina Haskell said that she would. When I talked with both of them and asked hard questions, they had made very strong statements against it, both in writing and before this committee. So let me ask you the same question I asked Director Pompeo in his confirmation hearing. If you were ordered by the president, if the CIA were ordered by the president to restart the CIA's use of enhanced interrogation techniques that fall outside the Army Field Manual, what would you do? What would you do as General Counsel?
I absolutely would not follow that order.
But what would you do?
I would inform the president that that would be a violation of the law, and that I would ensure that I am confident that the director would also impress upon the president that that would be an unlawful act.
So you would specifically take it as your responsibility as General Counsel to do so?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. In your pre-hearing questionnaire, you were asked, do you support the standards for detainee treatment specified in the revised Army Field Manual on Interrogation as required by Section 1045 of the National Defense Authorization Act for FY16? Could you please here, under oath, reaffirm your commitment to fully comply with all governing interrogations, including the legal bar on the use of any interrogation method not listed in the Army Field Manual?
Senator Feinstein, I commit not only to ensuring that the CIA complies with the letter, but also the spirit of that law.
Okay, thank you. That's good. You informed me earlier this week that you have read the full 500-page declassified executive summary of the Senate Intelligence Committee's study on the CIA's detention and interrogation program. While some may have continue to have differences of opinion, the Senate report is fact-based on documents, cables, emails, and to the best of my reading, nothing in the report has been refuted. I think I mentioned to you if the CIA had a problem with any of it, we looked at that, we made some changes where we felt the CIA was correct and where we felt they were wrong, we so noted it. But their view is in that report. The full report is more than 6,700 pages with nearly 38,000 footnotes. I believe it's time to acknowledge truthfully what was done and then move forward with strength and resolve to make sure that a program like this never happens again. Would you commit to this committee that you will read the classified version of the report's findings and conclusions if confirmed as General Counsel?
Yes, Senator Feinstein, I'd be particularly interested in the parts of the report that address the General Counsel's office.
Thank you.